Universities in Afghanistan have reopened after a winter break, with female students barred by the Taliban rulers from returning.
The Taliban government of Afghanistan has ordered an indefinite ban on university education for women.
Now, no university education for women nationwide. And the latest from the Taliban in Afghanistan.
Afghanistan under the Taliban remains the most repressive country in the world regarding women's rights. Rosa Otunbayeva, Special Representative of the UN Secretary-General and head of the UN political mission in Afghanistan, said in a statement, "At a time when Afghanistan needs to recover from decades of war," Otunbayeva said, "half of the country's potential doctors, scientists, journalists, and politicians are shut away in their homes, their dreams crushed, and their talents confiscated. It has been distressing to witness their methodical, deliberate, and systematic efforts to push Afghan women and girls out of the public sphere," she further added. In 2002, after years of being denied their rights under the previous Taliban regime, Afghan women celebrated International Women's Day full of hope. The day was observed in Afghanistan and at UN headquarters with the theme Afghan Women Today. Realities and opportunities and commitments were made to support our Afghan sisters rebuild their lives and be full partners in the post-conflict reconstruction of the country. On that day, the international community said that the plight of Afghan women had been an affront to all standards of dignity, equality, and humanity. It stressed that world support for reasserting their rights should go beyond expressions of solidarity. Despite challenges, Afghan women and girls made steady advances towards fulfilling their human rights. However, the situation has significantly regressed to the pre-2002 period, and women are denied their fundamental rights and freedoms, including the rights to education, to work, to the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health, freedom of movement, and freedom from fear and want, and from discrimination. Now, over 2 decades later, girls in Afghanistan have been banned from secondary school and women from tertiary education. Women and girls have been banned from entering amusement parks, public baths, gyms, and sports clubs for 4 months. Women have been banned from working in NGO offices. Since the takeover of Afghanistan by the Taliban in August 2021, women have been wholly excluded from public office and the judiciary. Today, Afghanistan's women and girls are required to adhere to a strict dress code and are not permitted to travel more than 75 kilometers without a mahram. They are compelled to stay at home. In 2 weeks, a new school year will start in Afghanistan. If the restrictions are indeed temporary, as the Taliban claim, they have an opportunity to prove it by lifting the ban on girls and women attending secondary and tertiary education institutions and allowing them to resume their studies at the start of this school year. When the Taliban swept into power last August, many expected they would reprise the draconian governance of their 1990s emirate. Despite pledges of moderation and reform from some Taliban factions, 1 year later, those predictions have largely turned out to be prescient, especially in the case of women's rights. Afghan women have seen their rights disappear since the Taliban regained control of their country in August 2021. All over the country, women report feeling invisible, isolated, suffocated, living in prison-like conditions. Many are unable to have their basic needs met without access to employment or aid, including access to medical health care and psychological support, in particular for victims of violence, including sexual violence. It's a sobering reminder of how swiftly and aggressively women's and girls' rights can be taken away. Let's have a look at the feeble and weakening condition of Afghan women under Taliban rule. In August 2021, after 20 years of war, the United States withdrew its troops from Afghanistan. Following America's exit, the Taliban, a predominantly Pashtun Islamic fundamentalist group, quickly regained power in the Central Asian country. The Taliban's return to power has affected all citizens. In December 2022, for example, the government reinstituted public floggings and executions. But Afghan women, in particular, have seen decades of hard-earned rights stripped away during less than 2 years of Taliban rule. Though the Taliban initially promised to uphold women's and minority rights, they have instead imposed strict restrictions. The most recent blow to women's rights came in April, when women were banned from working for the United Nations, further limiting their participation in the workforce and day-to-day life. Pre-1979, women enjoy broad freedoms. Prior to 1979, women in Afghanistan enjoyed a level of freedom comparable to women in other countries. They gained suffrage in 1919, 1 year before women in the United States. Through the 1960s, women's rights were expanding and greater equality was emphasized in the Afghan constitution. Progress continued through the 1970s, but in 1978, the president was killed in a communist coup. The Soviets invaded in 1979, after which the Americans and the Soviets backed different sides in Afghanistan's civil war. In the meantime, religious extremist groups gained greater control of the country, and women saw increasing restrictions on their freedom. 1996 to 2001, First Taliban rule. The Taliban first emerged in 1994 out of militant groups that were founded during the Soviet invasion. By 1996, the Taliban had seized control of Afghanistan for the first time and rolled back freedoms for women. Under Taliban rule, women and girls were barred from attending school, working, leaving the house without a chaperone, and speaking publicly, among other restrictions. 2001 to August 2021. Taliban ousted. Progress for women. The United States and its allies invaded Afghanistan in the aftermath of the September 11th terrorist attacks. By the end of 2001, the Taliban were ousted from power, though military conflicts persisted over the subsequent 2 decades. During this time, rights were expanded. Girls attended school, women had jobs, and the government enshrined women's rights in the Constitution. August 2021. The Taliban returns. Following the United States' withdrawal from Afghanistan, the Western-backed government quickly fell to extremists. On August 15th, the Taliban took control of the capital city of Kabul. Initially, the Taliban promised to continue upholding women's rights, but it quickly became evident that this would not happen. September 2021, universities segregated. A month after the Taliban took control, the government stated that women would be allowed to continue attending universities, but with several caveats. Classrooms were segregated by gender and head coverings were mandatory. Women were only allowed to take classes taught by other women or by elderly men. March 2022, girls' schools closed. Schools were still closed due to the pandemic when the Taliban took power. In the ensuing months, girls in 6th grade and above were told that they would eventually be able to return to school. However, the government needed to ensure that they could do so in accordance with the Taliban's religious ideology. Schools were supposed to reopen in March. Just hours after the schools reopened, however, the government canceled classes for teen girls indefinitely. May 2022, strict dress code mandated for women. In May, the government cracked down even further on women's freedoms in Afghanistan, mandating that women must cover from head to toe whenever they leave their homes. This includes wearing a mesh covering over their faces. If women violate these restrictions, their male guardians will be punished, possibly with jail. November 2022, women barred from parks and gyms. By November, women were banned from an increasing number of public spaces, including parks and gyms. The Taliban claimed that it had tried to keep these spaces open for women, but were forced to close them as a result of too many people violating rules about gender segregation and face coverings. According to some Afghan women, however, the Taliban were lying and there were no rule violations. December 2022, women barred from universities and working at NGOs. On December 20th, women were banned, effective immediately, from attending universities. In spite of high schools being closed months earlier, many Afghan girls had continued their studies online in the hopes of attending universities. This decision was widely condemned by the global community, with UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres calling it a broken promise from the Taliban. Afghanistan attracted further criticism from the international community on December 24th, when it ordered all non-governmental organizations to stop their female employees from working. The Economy Ministry justified this decision by claiming that some workers had not adhered to the strict dress code for women in Afghanistan. The UN and several international aid groups said that this decision would inhibit their ability to provide aid to a country where the majority of people live in poverty. April 2023, women barred from UN positions. On April 4th, the Taliban extended the December ban on Afghan women from non-governmental organizations, this time specifically targeting those working for the United Nations. Following the move, which the Security Council called unprecedented in the history of the United Nations, the organization directed nearly all 3,300 Afghan staff members, including roughly 400 Afghan women, not to return to its offices and instead work from home with limited and calibrated exceptions. In early May, the UN held a 2-day conference in Qatar for a closed-door conversation on Afghanistan's humanitarian situation. While representatives from various countries and groups participated, the Taliban was not invited to attend. We call on the de facto authorities to end the harmful annihilation of women's rights and lift restrictions imposed on women, including on their working with NGOs. We further call on the de facto authorities to fulfill their obligations under the international human rights treaties, including CEDAW, to which Afghanistan is a state party. The international community must continue to provide robust support to Afghan women and 1. Reaffirm their commitment by taking concrete actions to support and realize the rights of women and girls in Afghanistan, in particular their right to education and employment. 2. Prioritize women and girls' rights in all their engagements with the de facto authorities and demand the immediate reversal of edicts and policies that assault women's and girls' rights. 3. Take proactive measures to support Afghan women to engage in decision-making processes in Afghanistan and about Afghanistan. 4. Increase support to Afghan women so that they can resume employment, access aid and healthcare, including reproductive healthcare, and have an adequate standard of living.